Hello everyone, welcome back. So I wanted to do some shorter videos. So this is a speeded up video in which I'm going to explain a bit of what I'm doing. So for this video I wanted to draw a crystal flower, and I like to think of flowers as having some kind of spiral base. This way it's a bit more easier to make the petals. So I did a smaller spiral down at the bottom and a larger one at the top for the crown. And after that I'm just building up the petals in a rounded shape. Now this is just a sketch and it doesn't need to be perfect, so just try and have fun with it. After that I make a new layer and make the petals more sharper and with a bit more density, so we can have that crystal impression. So just use more pointier shapes. No need to add too many details here, just try and get the base shape. And at the end just be happy with how it looks like. I'm also doing some middle lines just so I can maybe easily read the shape. However, those are not necessarily, so it's just for you if you want to do them. It might be helpful in the long run. Okay, so then I'm going to make the sketches a very light opacity and just use the lasso fill or any other kind of brush to make the base shape on a different layer. And after that just use the airbrush to add a few highlights and shadows. I also wanted to try out a bit of a transparency, so I used a bit of the eraser in the middle of the flower. However, by the end I decided not to use it because it looked a bit muddy. But you can definitely go that route if you want to. So on a different layer I'm adding more colors. So I'm just color picking whatever I already have in the canvas and just try to follow the lines of the sketches. Also check the navigation so you can actually see how visible the drawing is and if you need to add more shadows or more highlights in different parts. But for now just a rough color base, it's going to be more than enough as we're going to detail it afterwards. At this point I also go around and play a bit with the contrast and colors just so I don't have to go back and forth, and I also pick another color for the shadows and just use the airbrush to add them in certain places. When unsure, just make everything on a different layer. And if you like them, you can always merge them afterwards. So here I'm just going around and add more details to the petals. Since I want it to look more like a crystal, it's okay if you just use very sharp edges, like triangles and full colors. Just try and follow the shape and just make more pointy looking shapes. Also, there's no need to use the color wheel that much since we've already have all the colors that we need already in the canvas. So just go and color pick everything you need. And also check the drawing in the navigation tool. So if you see if it's tinier and it reads well, then it's okay. So at this point I'm just going around and trying to pick up some brushes to make it a bit more painterly. So I just ended up using the flat watercolor brush. You can use any brush you want and just be comfortable with it, and also work on a different layer if you are unsure. And at this point I'm going out with the polyline or the lasso tool and just pick different petals that are not close to each other so I can just work on detailing them. And again, it's a trial and error. If you're a bit unsure, just use a different layer. So in my case I duplicated every layer that I had up until now and merged it into one layer, and I duplicated again and clipped it to the base layer, and I'm working on that one. And also it's okay to maybe work on zones that are not that important until you get the hang of it, and then you can move on to other petals that are more of the focal point. So at this point I'm just alternating between the lasso fill and the brush and just continue the pattern of making diamond or triangular shapes, and using I guess full color and also high contrast and high highlights. It's a crystal, so it's okay to be a bit bold. You can always soften these harsh shapes with a bit of an airbrush. I would just suggest to use brushes that you're comfortable with, because you can get the same results just using a lot of other brushes. These are just the default brushes from the program, but I mainly just use the Gpen Airbrush and the Lasso Fill, or just the Lasso tool. This is one of the rare occasions where I'm just using watercolor flat brush. And since we've already selected all the petals that we want to work on, it's a bit easier to not go over the lines. And again, we already have all the colors that we need, so just color pick everything that you want and just go and have fun with triangular shapes and pointy lines. And also, since we've already done the sketch and the lines, I think it's a bit easier at this point to just go ahead and just paint everything, keeping the sketch in mind. If you want to, you can also work on these petals on a different layer, but in my case it was just easier to work everything on the same layer. And don't forget to add a bit of an airbrush at the base so you can actually read the form a bit better. Okay, so at this point I think I have a good understanding of how I want the rose to look like, but we still have a lot of petals to work on, so let's continue. So I'm selecting other petals that are not close to each other and just redo the steps. Color pick, lasso tool, airbrush, and a normal brush, and the watercolor brush if you want to, and follow the shape of the petals that we already did. And I guess don't be afraid to add a bold contrast. We can adjust the colors a bit at the end if we want to, but I guess it's important to be happy with how it looks at each stage. I hope this video is not too fast forward or speeded up. I wanted to make it just a bit shorter. The whole drawing took around 3 to 4 hours, I think. And as usual, it's a bit of a testing as well, so it's okay to just go back and redo certain things if you're not happy with them. And it's also okay to just try out a different technique if you want to. And also keep in mind the purpose of the illustration. So I wanted to look like a game item. However, if I wanted to animate this one, I would have probably drawn each and every petal on a different layer. That way it would be a bit easier to animate. Okay, so I'm merging all the layers I have up until now and just play around with the color and contrast, and also erasing parts of it. And when I'm happy, I'm actually just merging everything again and add it on a different layer. I'm also changing the background a bit, since I thought it would be a better idea to be on a bit of a darker background so that the rose can be more visible. And I'm hiding everything I don't need in a folder down beneath, so this way it's organized. Now at this point I think it reads okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and just add a bit more details. So I added some droplets and some blur around them, and I'm just going ahead and sharpen up the petals just a bit. So just using the lasso fill again, I'm going ahead and just make extra highlights on each and every petal. And I'm also color picking different tones that I already have and just play around with shapes again. Here you can also use layer modes like multiply or overlay or screen, depending on the effect you want to achieve. So sometimes they can be very useful, and other times you can just color pick whatever you already have and just add details on a normal layer. At this point you can spend as much time as you want on it, because we already have the flower, the pattern. If you look in the navigator, it's readable, so it's well, at this point it's just about having fun with the shapes. We've already done all the hard part by constructing it. I'm also using a layer in a darker color on color mode. This way it's easier to read the intensity of the gradients. Sometimes it's a bit hard if you're just working with colors to notice if they are too light or too dark, so sometimes it's just better to use a grayscale mode to make sure everything reads correctly, and that way you can also notice where you need to add more shadows or more highlights or a more lighter color or darker color. And here I'm just playing around with different effects. I think I've used a liner light, but you can use overlay or dodge color or any other if you want to. But in my case I think I liked this one the best. And I've also duplicated the rose on a different layer beneath, make it a whiter color and add a blur effect, so this way I actually have a glow. Okay, and final touches, I'm selecting different petals and just make them a bit darker or extra shadow. This is where the grayscale layer comes in handy. And I think yeah, I'm just adding a few more details, and again, you can, at this stage, you can play around as much as you want. You can also zoom in if you want to do more details. Here I'm testing out another layer with different colors to see which one I like best, because I wanted to add a bit of a warmer tone on some zones on the flower. This way it's going to look more colorful. And again, when I'm happy with it, I'm going to select each and every layer, duplicate it and merge it in a new layer. This way I can play around with the color contrast or other settings that might help with visibility. I also added a few more dots, maybe a bit of an airbrush in some zones so that you can see the glow on it, and I guess a bit of shadow, but that's about all. So I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time. Bye bye.